Well, everyone, welcome back to another live Q&A. My apologies for being a little bit late today. I'm battling a little bit of a cold, and so I got tied up, getting things squared away because I wasn't going to be doing this live, but we're here, so I'm glad that we can do it. How are you doing, Alicia?
I'm well, Mark. I'm glad you made it. I know it's tough when you're under the weather, so thanks for being here and sticking it out.
Well, I'll let you share your infinite wisdom, and I'll be a background player here a little bit today. All right. Well, there's been a few things, Alicia, that are going on in immigration, and I thought it just wouldn't make any sense for us to dive into questions without addressing some of the interesting developments. And we'll get to our greetings, and we'll give everybody shout outs like Aman here. Great to have you connecting in on Facebook. Please let us know where you're tuning in from, you guys. Colin as well. Great to see you. But what we want to start with is just the recent changes that the minister has announced with respect to how they're going to manage international students. And we know for quite a while now that there's been some struggles within the program, and there's been challenges for the students, challenges for the school, challenges for the government, and the perception even of international students in Canada, which has created just a need to act. And so just a few days ago, about 5 days ago, Minister Miller made some announcements in this news release. But what are your thoughts? Maybe you could just kind of hit on the high levels for individuals and just give us your thoughts on what you think about
hmm
some of these
So,
changes.
super important that people realize what is going on, that the department is changing the rules with respect to international students. There are going to be some changes, and some of those we've talked about already. I know Igor and I have mentioned, and we mentioned last week as well, that those study permit application forms, the 1297 is, or 1294 is actually already changed. So there's a December 1st version, which has different fields in it. So those, make sure that you're using those new forms. And then as of January 1st, so next month, there's going to be a change fundamentally to the cost of living in terms of the funds that students are required to be able to show. And to be fair, I mean that cost of
Yeah,
living allowance was way too old, right?
yeah,
It was not realistic for most students in Canada to say that they could live on $10,000 like over and above what they've already paid for tuition. So the $10,000 for sure was too low. So I think that is a legitimate, realistic thing for the government to do, to say, look, at $10,000 is not representative of what it actually costs to live in Canada in 2024. So the new cost of living requirement is for students to show in Canadian funds that they have at least 20,635, which is 75% of the low income cutoff guideline, to be able to show that they can make it. They, even if they're living in residence or whatever, it's still expensive to, buy food, to pay for basic necessities. So this is a more realistic figure. What it means, though, is that students are going to have to be able to show the provenance of those funds, right? So make sure that they have that in their bank account. If they're getting gifts from their parents, make sure they're getting gift deeds properly notarized, showing where those funds have come from. Doesn't make sense to try to come from a friend. If you're getting a whole bunch of money in your account, it's got to come from a family member. So
yeah.
that's one thing. Everybody keep in mind, January 1st. As of January 1st, you've got to have the 20,635 Canadian equivalent. If you're looking at foreign funds, make sure that you have the exchange rate and you can bump it up a little bit in case that exchange rate fluctuates. So hopefully that's one thing that's going to help protect some students from, getting here and realizing they can't afford to live. So that's, I think, a positive development. It's
Yeah.
just realistic. So that's one major change that's happening.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
keep in mind that's for a single applicant. So that's the requirement if it's just one applicant. If you're trying to bring a family member, that figure is going to go up.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about this for sure. Um, you know, One of the challenges always has been within the program, the balance between coming over to study, genuinely study, and trying to find a pathway to permanent residence. And when the government created Express Entry, I don't think they ever envisioned the impact it would have on the study permit world. And to say that there's no correlation between Express Entry and the desire to study in Canada would be a little naive. And so I'm really curious. They talk about the impact this is going to have on vulnerable groups, and not everybody can afford that, but maybe they there's still a very, very valid reason why they should be granted the ability to study in Canada. So I hope that they have some of those programs in place that will help maybe students who may not, for whatever reason, be able to meet the traditional standard that they're now setting. I guess we'll
Yeah,
see how that plays out.
and that leads to another important point about that announcement, Mark, is that we've said you got to stop working full time as at the end of December. Well, what this policy also has done is extended that period of potential work out until the spring of next year. So that waiver of the 20 per hour a week cap on off-campus work is going to be extended to April 30th, 2024. But be really careful about that. Take a look at the blog article that I wrote about whether you can really be working more than 20 hours per week off campus, because it's only for certain students, depending on when you applied, depending on what the conditions are on your work permit. And you've got to be really careful that that time spent working, even if it's 30 hours a week and technically full time, will not count towards your Canadian work experience express entry points. Be really careful with that. You cannot count it for express entry. So yes, maybe the government's saying, hey, students are struggling financially, we'll let them work more, but that's really tough. Like, to be a full-time student and to be working full-time puts you in a really dicey situation. So please, please, please be very careful about this full-time work, because if your full-time work impedes or prevents you from meeting your study permit conditions, i.e., because you're working full-time, you start failing your courses and you can't pass, that means that you're working illegally because you failed to comply with your study permit conditions. So be super careful about that. And then the last thing is they're extending that facilitative measure. So, as long as you can have that 50% less than the program of study, then you can continue to be able to count that. But it's going to, it's not going to last indefinitely.
Yep.
So take a look at this public policy. Um, the work is being extended, but there are caveats with it. And do be aware that you need to make sure that you're going to meet that additional fund requirement.
And the
Oh,
last
and the,
final piece, the
yeah,
last final piece, probably one of the most important for everyone that is listening here who is languishing on a postgrad work permit that is expiring. Those who meet the terms of this most recent 18-month postgrad work permit holder policy will be able to apply up to the end of December 31st, 2023. But guys, after that, that's it. There's no more, there will be no more 18-month work permit extensions. And what that means for all of you, and this is specifically what Minister Miller is saying here. Look, we have to draw the line. We can't just keep pushing people down, down, down. If you don't qualify for permanent residence through one of the programs, then you're going to have to go home, which is really, really tough. And I know Alicia and I have lots of debates over this, and it's hard. It's hard not to get a little bit frustrated, because Minister Miller, for a long time, extolled the virtues of international students, and he was the previous immigration minister. But the reality is circumstances change, times change, and what once was a good idea can very quickly very quickly run into problems because of unforeseen consequences. And I think one of the things that we've always known is that international students are really, really important for the country. They really are some of the best new permanent residents to settle in Canada, because they've gone to school here. They've, essentially been, accustomed to life in Canada and adjustments to Canada, and are really in good positions to take positions and to fill the labor force. But I don't think anyone would have contemplated what's happened within the study permit industry. And I'm sorry, this is where I'll be critical, Alicia. There's a lot of crappy schools out there, and I know I got into trouble before because I said that, but there are a lot of schools that I shouldn't say crappy, but that have taken way more students than they ever should have in the beginning. And there's been newspaper articles, you can read it yourselves. They've identified the fact that some schools are have students 3-4 times the number of students, and they actually have space in the school. And I don't know ultimately what the game plan is, other than just trying to make more money. And I understand too, for our public schools, when they feel like they're underfunded and they rely so heavily on international students and the tuition that they pay, well, of course you're going to be incentivized to increase enrollment. So hopefully these changes will to some extent curb the schools that maybe really shouldn't have a DLI designation, and open up the door for better schools to be able to produce really good education, which we take pride in, for our Canadian post-secondary education system. Because I think the other schools have really caused harm to our education system. So we'll leave it at that.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and Mark, I do agree with you that I think is the policy intent, and that's what the minister is saying is part of the changes with respect to the 1294 forms is that there's a new process where the school actually has to verify the letter of acceptance within a certain period of time after that application is submitted, because they want to have another check on balance and making sure that that DLI has actually issued the letter of acceptance, that it's not a fraudulent document. So that's one thing that's happening. And if the provinces are not properly regulating the schools, the current designated learning institutions, then some of them might be delisted by the federal government. So keep track, go to that designated learning institution list, make sure that you're looking at it and updating it. And the other thing, part of this news release was the minister intimating that there might be visa restrictions on the number of international students if the schools are not falling into line.
Yeah. And these are all, uncertainties that we're looking at now. And, the hard part, Alicia, is that there have been so many programs, really, really good programs over the years. And we do a lot of business immigration for companies, corporations, people that are coming to, to establish businesses and things in Canada. And many of the good programs have all been shut down because of abuse. And this comes right back to, to the representative industry. And when people are trying to make money, they will find every freaking way they can to do that. In whether whether they're pushing clients into things that really don't qualify for, or whether they're pursuing different schemes that really they know are not in line with the law, but still do it anyway, just because of the money that comes out. And we're going to be meeting with some of our local communities, even within the rural renewal stream here in Alberta, who are also suffering from this. Good, genuine programs when they're trying to do things right, and then scrupulous people are coming in and abusing the workers and taking advantage of it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So keep in mind, if you are an applicant, never give up control of your application. Make sure that when you are signing things, you have a full copy. You understand what's going on, because the federal court has found time and time again, applicants are responsible for the people that they hire. And if you've hired an unethical agent of some sort, then the federal court can find you liable for misrepresentation, or maybe they're going to investigate fraud, and that's a criminal offense. So be really careful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's say some hellos here. So Colin says Merry Christmas, and he's in South Africa. Great to have you connecting in. If Tech, good to see you. Thanks for connecting. Tien Tai says hi. Bright, hey, good to see you. There's Bright. He says, hello, Mark and Alicia. Been a while since I joined. Hope all is good. Things are going very well. And we've got Ryder K says, still from Toronto, Ontario. Well, there was a time I'd say, well, that's great. That's wonderful. But I'm not saying that anymore, you guys. The number of international students that have gone to Ontario to study, and at some points it's been almost 50% of all international students go to Ontario to study in Canada. It makes it really difficult for finding pathways to permanent residence unless your human capital is really, really high and off the charts. And, I've talked about that at length in the past as well. But regardless, Ryder, it's great to see you, and anyone who's living in Ontario. It's great to have you tuning in. Nita says, hey, Mark and Alicia, good to see you again. And then we've got Wagner says, hey, guys, good to see you. So there's a few shout outs. And like I said, we always love to hear where you guys are tuning in from. So please, make sure that you post, and we'll try to give you a shout out as we go through here. All right. As far as other announcements or things like that, Alicia, I don't know if there really is too much other than, go ahead.
The 3 draws. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I did, with those 3 draws, I know we've done a special live I did on Friday, I think it was, to talk about those, but let's just pull those up for anyone who missed the live stream that I did, that special on Friday. So let's flip over here and take a peek at it. So yes, we were wondering if there was going to be anything happening. And we can see here as of December the 8th, 1 week ago. And actually, let's go back and take a look at all the rounds, and we can hit those kind of at a high level. So we had 3 rounds on the 6th, the 7th and the 8th of December back on track. So what's going on here, Alicia? What's going on?
Well, and Igor's theory is that they draw about 10,000 applicants a month, right? So they've already now drawn 10,000, over 10,000 applicants for the month of December because they were kind of behind. They hadn't done anything for November. So maybe we'll see another draw in December, but they did have that general draw December 6th. It was a pretty big draw, 4,750 people, but the CRS, look at the CRS, right? It's 561. So basically they pulled out the PNP people, those people with nominations and the 600 points will have automatically gotten their invitation to apply under that draw. Some rock star applicants that maybe had strong French levels might have had that 561. But for regular humans, that's a tough mark to get. So then they had the French only draw the next day, December 7th. They only did 1,000 applicants, and that French draw was 470. So that is attainable, especially if you have French. So that will have pulled quite a number of people who were eligible because of French. And then again on the 8th, finally, there's been another STEM draw. It's been a while since there was a STEM draw, and that's a big pull. So 5,900 applicants, and the minimum CRS was 481. So I know I have a client who's been waiting for almost 2 years who finally got, and then they had to renew their express entry profile, but they finally got an ITA under this most recent draw.
Yeah. And I have the same thing as well, French and the STEM. The interesting thing about the STEM is how high I feel like this still is. So even after drawing 6,000 STEM applicants, the CRS score was still 481. Like it was still quite high. And so I think people have to understand, if you're STEM and you're sitting in the 440s, it's going to be tough. And who are in the 440s, or lower in STEM, it's individuals, like if you look at the list, and this is something I want to point out, let's go back and just take a peek at the actual round of invitations. If you're wondering which occupations fit into here, all you need to do is look at the actual ministerial instructions, and it will show you. So when you go down here and you look at some of these occupations, and we'll get to the bottom here, you can see, yes, the architects and the managers and the data scientists, and you can see they are here. And I don't know if they don't put the actual tier, business systems specialists. So there's a lot of IT for sure. Engineers are on this list. You can see that the individuals, pretty much everybody, you need to have at least a bachelor's degree. I'm not sure if we have anyone. I don't see any technicians in here. It looks like it's all kind of bachelor's and up. But even a bachelor's degree, right? Even a bachelor's degree alone, if you're outside of Canada and you are looking to, to get through one of the STEM categories, 481 points is, that's high. It really is. And so these individuals still need to have probably had either a family member in Canada, or they had Canadian work experience. And one other thing I want to point out, if we go back to the actual rounds of invitations here, this, as of December 5th, so this is before all the draws started, this is what the pool looked like. So you can see over 600 at that time, there were 4,525. So you know that some of these individuals, it's hard to believe, are over 600 and are not provincial nominees. But you just look at how high these totals are. And even above 500, there were still 5,457. So I hope you guys can appreciate how competitive it is. Even in the 480s, there's 10,000. So if you're in the 440s and you're wondering, what does the future hold for me? Well, wow, look at that. In that range right there, there's over 60,000 people. That's how competitive the express entry is now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the future general draws, to see, exactly where the points sit. But if you don't fit within one of the stems, which obviously French fits into one of those alone. Personally, I don't think it's necessary to have a French draw myself. I think the French, if you speak French, you have enough points just alone to separate you from everybody else. So it'll be curious to see the percentage of people that come through general that actually are also French language speakers, even though they're getting flushed out. And I think part of the reason the score here, 470, when 1,000 are drawn, because 470 is actually pretty low when you consider you're getting an extra 50 points for French language. So really, in some cases, and obviously doesn't play out exactly like this, but they're probably 410 to 420 without the French. So from a human capital standpoint, they're still really competitive. So
it's
there
all
you
about
go.
French. What we're
It
saying
is. It's the
is learn
golden
French,
age. Yeah, it's the
perfect your
golden
French.
age. Golden age of Francophone immigration for sure. All right. Okay, well, let's get to some more questions here. We'll just pull up here. Okay, so here's a good question. This is from Varen, and he's watching on LinkedIn. Thanks for connecting in, Varen. He says, hi, Mark and Alicia. What if my CRS score drops down after I submit my application, but it is still above the cutoff score? Will my application get refused? So we'll assume he's saying after he submits his EAPR, like maybe as a birthday or something.
So take a look, Varun, there's a public policy guidance on the section of the Act, A11.2 or ERPA, Section 11.2, that talks about the completeness check and the requirement to maintain your minimum cutoff, so the MEC. So you want to make sure that you're still meeting the program eligibility for the category in which you were drawn. So if you are qualifying under CEC, so if you look at your invitation to apply or your summary page, it's going to say whether you met CEC, whether you met FSW or FST, but probably FSW or CEC. Those things need to always be met, right? So make sure that you still met those minimum eligibility requirements for the category that you are eligible for. So if your CRS drops down below that and you're no longer eligible because of minimum eligibility, you're done. It's game over. In some circumstances, if something changes in your score, and for the draw for which you were given an ITA, your CRS is still above the minimum for that draw, you might be okay. But keep in mind, you need to notify immigration of material changes in circumstance. If your CRS goes below the minimum for that draw under which you were invited, your application will most likely be refused. The only thing that they do write into the public policy for sure is your birthdays. So if the only reason that your CRS goes down after you submitted EAPR is because you have a birthday, you should not lose those points for age after you've submitted your EAPR. So that's the only thing where they give you a little bit of leeway.
It's quite amazing, Alicia. I was looking before. I've looked up that page probably 100 times, but now for whatever reason, my Google just never pulls it up. It's so infuriating. But there's a lot of other people that have basically commandeered that search term, Canada visa. Other people who, are not adding any value instead of the original page. All right, we'll leave it at that.
It's in
okay.
the Teams link from yesterday.
Yeah, I know it is. I'm so shocked that I wasn't able to find the stupid thing. Anyways, moving on. Yes. All right. Let's see what's next here. Okay, Alicia, now that we've talked about the rounds of invitations, Showcat says, what's your score prediction for the upcoming French-speaking category-based draw? So if we know previously that we had our round of invitation was, flip back here, was 470, and we just had one. So if they were to do another one, what's your prediction?
Yeah, I mean, if they were to do another one right away, I think it would probably be a little bit lower. Like we might even drop down to like 465 because they've already pulled out so many people in the last week, basically. But I don't know if they will do another targeted French draw because they just did one, right? So they might take a turn with one of the other, like they might do healthcare, for example. So it might be one of the other targeted occupations because they haven't done recently another targeted occupation other than the STEM, right? So they did healthcare in October, but that was the last one that they have done.
And we can even filter it. Let's just see what comes up here. See if it works with us. So here's historically, if we look at this, when they've done large rounds of invitations back to back, so you can see they did two back in July, the 7th and the 12th, back to back, 1 week after another. And they really was like 6,000. It dropped down all the way to 375. Now they'd been flushing out, candidates before then, but I think more and more people you can see are figuring out that, hey, I need to have French. And so, because before this was the first French language proficiency. I think I have to trust this. I don't see any other draws. So July 7th was the first, and it was 439. And you can see even now how it's gone up. little by little, over time, it's become more and more competitive. I'm actually quite surprised that this was 470, but there's the world we're in, you guys. There's the world we're in. All right, let's get to some more questions here. Okay, Nudeep says, will there be a CAC draw today?
It's hard to tell. I mean, they might do more invitations because they missed all of November. So it seems like they've got their systems figured out. Those technical glitches hopefully have been resolved, and hopefully now everything's set up. We did talk at length about this new requirement under the profiles for postal codes. So make sure that if you've not updated your Express Entry profile, you go back in and make sure that you're putting your primary residence postal code, postal codes if you've attended Canadian schools, and then also postal codes for employers if you have Canadian experience. So make sure to go update your CEC profiles if you've not yet done so. In terms of whether there will be another draw, we're already over 10,000. So I don't know if that's because they were trying to make up for November and now they'll do more for December, or they might just say, hey, we're good, and they might wait until January next year.
Mm-hmm. All right, next question. This one is from Prak Weiss. It says, both my spouse and I have different addresses in our passports. Which address needs to be meant in the police clearance certificate? The current address or the one matching the passport? I got an OINP nomination in which the address is current address. Thanks. I think this is becoming overcomplicated, but anyways, yeah.
Yeah, so whatever address you're actually living at is what you want to declare on your forms to the OINP and usually in your Express Entry application. Sometimes, depending on the country of nationality, when they are doing the police clearance reports, they want to match your residence that used to be your residence in your country of origin. So your family's residence or the village that you came from, and that's how they run the police report. So just be careful that when you're giving the information to the local police office, you're clear that, this is where I used to live, this is where my family's residence is. And if they're asking for current residence, then, you're currently in Canada or wherever you are. And then make sure that you're honest in your immigration application forms in terms of the differences between a residential address where your head is on a pillow at night versus your mailing address, which can be like a PO box or something where you get your mail.
Perfect. Okay, Anurag asks a question that I have covered extensively in my Express Entry course. I'm going to share my screen over here in a little bit. He says, Mark and Alicia, our passport, family page, and marriage certificate showing dad's name adequate to prove sibling relationships. No, my brother does not have a birth certificate. So I'm just going to flip over here. Yes. So this is the Express Entry course. If you guys haven't seen it yet, we cover all of these types of things in detail. I've got a module on mastering your documents. The masterclass actually starts next week, the next version. I think it's on the second page here, proof of sibling relationship. And one of the best sources of information is the Completeness Check website. And so here you can see this is the government's program delivery instructions, and they say exactly what you need to prove brother or sister for the purposes of the CRS points. And so when you're going through here and the document requirements, you'll see proof of relationship right here. They give examples. So whether it's you or your accompanying spouse or common law partner that has a sibling. So it says a birth certificate. That's one thing. You've indicated you don't have it. So an official document naming the applicant as a relative. So what's an example? A copy of the inside back cover of the relative's passport showing the relative's parents, marriage certificate, legal adoption documents, and any other document to prove. So sometimes when you don't have the easy thing, which is the birth certificate, then you have to be a little bit more creative. And there is a little bit of room to wiggle, but boy, you have to do it right. And but as far as the back inside cover, they specifically indicate that as a possibility, which is really, really good. But you have to be super careful. Anytime you don't hit on exactly what they're asking, you run the risk that an officer will say, I'm sorry, that's just not good enough. And I'll be honest, they're becoming so strict. I've got a potential client that's coming back that I had a consult with who, they mistakenly didn't realize that a child between the ages of 18 and 21 was a dependent and needed to be included in their application. Now, in fairness, their consultant told them they didn't have to include the dependent. And instead of IRCC coming back and asking and saying, hey, you've got another child, we need their information, they just rejected it, refused it. And I'll be honest, they are actively looking at ways to get files off their desk. And no longer do they care, not that they have for a long period of time, about making your life easy. The job that you have is to make their life easy and make sure everything is complete as it possibly can be, with no variance from their specific instructions. And if you can do that, then you can sleep good at night. If you are unable to get exactly what they want, then unless you really work hard and make sure that your letters of explanation and your other supporting documents, provide something as equal to as an alternative, then you run the risk that your application can get rejected. And, we see a lot of this, Alicia. I have so many consults with people who have, they just didn't realize how strict they were and thought, it just wasn't going to be an issue.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to this just quickly, Mark, is that I have seen cases, especially on certain countries, where the names of the parents are just not spelled the same way, or they have different occupations, or they're spelled differently and they have different occupations for the dad, for example. In which case, providing that passport might not be enough, right? You might actually, so what in our case, what we did is we had the parent go to a lawyer and have an affidavit, and I reviewed the affidavit before they took it to the lawyer, that said, look, this is the dad, I'm married to the mom, this was our first child, this is our second child, they're full biological siblings, here's the name on my passport, here's the name on my son's passport, here's the name on my other son's passport, and my name is spelled differently and my occupation is different, but I'm the same person, and here's some supporting proof. So if you are using alternate proof, really read it carefully. Sometimes people don't even realize that there's typos in those documents until they go and take a triple look at them.
Exactly. And that comes back to your instructions to everybody, that you absolutely must maintain some control over what is being submitted. Now, it's fine to hire a representative and for them to submit in their portal, but nothing ever gets submitted without you scrutinizing and being able to review and sign off on every single aspect of it. Because once again, we've seen this repeatedly. If a representative makes a mistake on your application, and the consequence will fall to you, and very rarely does it fall to them. All right, Mommy Bear says, good morning, Alicia and Mark. Thank you for your time. I'm applying for a work permit from Vietnam, probably. LMIA in place. When I provide documents to prove ties, do I have to provide documents where my dollars and land came from? I'm 24 years old. So it's an LMIA-based work permit.
Yeah, so on most LMIA-based work permits, as long as it's a high-skilled occupation, as long as you can prove that the company has already vetted your application in terms of they believe that you're qualified to do the job and they've provided a letter of support, if they've done it all properly, if you've provided evidence of your qualifications, yeah, you still need to provide some sort of proof of temporary intent. If you are providing land documents, make sure that those are in English or they have certified translations. If there's mysterious sums of money or, all of a sudden that land gets transferred to you right before you're coming to Canada, you do probably want to put a letter of explanation about why that's happening, and the fact that, you do have this connection back to your family land, the money came from your parents, there's a gift deed from them, that you're using this to be able to, transition to your life in Canada for this work, for this specific purpose. So, it's always difficult in terms of how much proof of temporary intent, but it also depends on your country of nationality. So if you're from a country of nationality that's visa required, and you've got some factors that might make your application more complicated, if you've been refused a visa in the past, if you don't have a big travel history, if you don't have a lot of ties, you might want to put a little bit more evidence in there.
All right, next question is from IFTech. And IFTech says, can I add work experience after an ITA previously not claimed, or is it best to include it in the personal history to avoid misrep, the work experience? It's from the same organization, different designation and time period.
So IFTech, I think I'd ring the bell on this one. You've got to be, in general, without providing legal advice, but just legal information. Anytime you have differently described your work experience on your express entry profile, and then there's a change after your ITA, you do really need to avoid misrepresentation. If it's the same employer, what I prefer doing is getting that detailed employer reference letter that lists every single position that you've had with that same company, what the time period was, the start date, the end date, the not code, the job duties, and the wage and the benefits, and the hours worked per week. Because those things might change, right? You might start as an intern, or you might be promoted 2 times. And if you didn't properly kind of separate out those different periods of work based on how many hours and what your job title and duties were, maybe you do fix it when you go to do your EAPR, but that's going to require careful explanations in your client letter of information. So, depending on how you do it and what you're doing it, what you're changing it to, it might have different consequences for your application. So I would recommend that you book a consult to discuss with us what effect that will have.
Yeah. And Alicia was talking about, if those of you who are new, the triangle bell here is that really is a legal question that we need to push over to a consultation. And one thing I do want to point out here, what Alicia was talking about, once again, this is the completeness check website, proof of work experience. You can see here that it says the following documents are mandatory. And then it says it should include all positions held while employed at the company. So this is where you have to be really, really careful. And yes, there are ways of structuring things such that you're not claiming points, say for a particular period of work history. There are ways of structuring it such that you're only claiming points for, or just, listing in your work history the sections of work where you want to claim points. Excuse me. And absolutely, you're always going to put the full picture in your personal history. But when it comes to the same employer, you have to be really, really careful, because IRCC, the officers, they will read into things, maybe things that you don't even understand. And this is, like I said, something we see all the time with our clients. You just assume that there's no issues and that everything, the way you've explained it, is how an officer sees it. And sometimes I'll put my old immigration officer hat on and I'll look at something and I'll say, oh, I get it. I understand why you put it or in that way, where you entered the information that way, or why you described it that way. But an officer could see it in this way. And, when it comes to my little express entry course, this masterclass is really just a super, super hyper focused Q&A. So when individuals go through and they follow through all of the various lessons and the modules, and that literally walk you through every single section, and just in every, most situations, there's going to be very, very specific things that we can never cover in this live Q&A that we're doing now, that are able to be covered in this masterclass, because it's really targeted and focused. And so, so this is, like I said, that you can, in the link below, there's you can subscribe to the course, but we see this a lot, and lots of people feel, well, what's the big deal? It's not a big deal. And it's not a big deal until it becomes a big deal. And Alicia and I deal in possibilities, not probabilities. So we don't say to ourselves, well, if tech, there's about a 53% chance, it's more likely than not that you're not going to have a problem. Do you guys hear that? Do you hear that online? Do you hear that in the comments that are sent? That's what's said. Well, it's probably not going to be an issue. Well, freak, are you going to bet your future on probabilities? The way Alicia and I look at this, and Igor's, we say, look, is there a possibility even that an officer could interpret it a certain way? And there's even a possibility, then we teach you, we provide you legal advice to avoid any of those dangers at all costs. And sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes people, when I give them advice, they're like, well, that's a lot of work. Well, then you're not a good fit for our firm. It's as simple as that. Because when I send your application in, whether I'm sick, battling a cold like I am or not, I want to sleep good at night. And I don't want a client coming back and saying, oh, we shouldn't have been so cavalier or casual with those answers. We should have taken the time to explain it better in the letter of explanation, which of course is something that I've built into the course. Instructions on how to complete what I have is 2 different forms of letters of explanation. One for the information in the answers you're providing in your application, and the other for documents. And so we talk about that in the course as well. Okay, here's a tricky one. I don't know if I have an answer. I have to assume the answer is probably yes, but this is one I've never seen, Alicia. So this is SOC Spot. Hi, Mark and Alicia. Hope all is well. Can foreign work experience earned before age 18, especially in trades, qualify for express entry? Is there a minimum age for foreign work experience? And I've never seen any restriction on this at all, ever. And I've read the ministerial instructions. I've read there's no age limit. So I don't see how an individual would be disqualified if they were paid, if they performed the duties, if it was continuous, if it was full-time or the equivalent in part-time, and it was at a skilled level. I don't see how it would be disqualified. Part of the reason we don't see it very often is usually you're not working at a skilled level at the age of 18, or I should say under the age of 18. And trades, understand, if you're saying trade experience, usually there's trades helpers and laborers, and then there's fully kind of certified tradespeople that have their Red Seal trade certification. And that's usually why we don't see it. So the question probably is whether or not you really are someone working at a tier 3 or higher, or you are a trades helper, which is a 4 or 5. I can't remember which one it falls under. So,
And keep in mind too that the minimum requirements for that is that you have to have 2 years of full-time trades experience within the last 5 years. So it's also difficult for people to meet this requirement if they're super young, because they're probably not having, as high points in terms of years of education, for example. So, it might be possible. You're right, Mark. I don't know if I've ever seen an age restriction on that window of trades experience.
yep. All right, we've got Human here who's asking a question. He says, my study permit's already approved, but my spousal open work permit was refused. If she reapplies in 2024, must we prove funds based on 2023 or 2024 tables? So this is a spousal open work permit. So I think they're maybe conflating this a little bit, because the study permit, I guess, is already approved. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm assuming that it is study permit and not sponsorship. So
Says, but
yeah,
my
if
spouse's, yeah. So I'm pretty sure, yeah, it wouldn't be, I'm sure it's study permit. I'm sure it's study permit.
okay, okay. So yeah, it is possible that they could refuse your spouse, especially if they think that, now the fact that you've got more family coming with you is going to reduce your proof of temporary intent. The more family members you have in Canada, the harder it is for you to prove temporary intent, because you also have a study permit, which is a temporary residence type of permit. So if she's going to apply in 2024, then yeah, you would have to prove funds based on 2024 figures. So make sure that you're meeting the income cutoff guidelines for that, and you can prove that you can support yourself and you can support your spouse. And then of course, um, if your study permit's already approved and you've actually entered Canada, that's great. But yeah, you might want to be careful that if it's after January 1st and you don't actually have that study permit issued yet, you might get into the world of having to prove, the 20,600 and whatever it is for a single family member, plus more in terms of the low income cutoff guidelines for a second family member if you don't actually have the study permit in hand yet.
And this is a little follow-up question. If it is approved, is it rare to refuse entry by the CBSA officer? Maybe I can maybe I can tackle that one. So I did work as an immigration officer on the border before the CBSA was created. They had a distinction between immigration officers and customs officers. And it is extremely rare to have a CBSA officer refuse to issue a study permit and a work permit to a couple coming into Canada after it was applied for, and pre-approved, essentially. But what are the circumstances? Well, at any point in time, they can review anything. And if they find that the information you submitted in your application maybe isn't accurate, or there's any type of, inadmissibility. So if they, do a search and, discover that there's a past removal order from Canada or deportation order, or there was criminality that didn't show up otherwise, or anything in the system, those are the things typically that would trip things up. But it is quite rare. But one very good tip is to make sure you bring with you everything that you used to apply for that study permit and the spousal open work permit. It doesn't hurt to have that with you when you go to the border, even though the likelihood of having to show it is like 1%. It's just another backup in case an officer, questions anything within the process. Anything else to add to that, Alicia?
No, I mean, There's always the possibility that an officer could refuse, and you always have to be honest and truthful when you get there. And I would recommend don't just have that on your phone, right? If you have a giant application that you're trying to scroll through on your cell phone, make sure to print off the documents and just have it as a paper file because, after a long international flight, you might not have any battery power left, or maybe you've got to wait for like 4 hours or 5 hours at the port of entry at the airport for them to actually process your application. So make sure that you have a physical copy of that application with you.
All right, here's another question that we cover at length in the course. It's about police clearance certificates. And I'm not quite sure, Alicia, if I understand this one fully, but it says, do I need to add a US police clearance certificate mentioned in travel history of more than 6 months after staying for 5 years? I came back at the age of 19 in July 2012 and did not return. So effectively what they're asking is this is time spent in the US that was over 10 years ago. But otherwise, but for the 10 years, obviously once you hit 18, if you've lived there for 6 months, then the police clearance is triggered. So what are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure of the sequence, but if it's what you said, Mark, then technically, as long as you have not traveled to that country since you've turned 18 and it's been within the last 10-year period, you've not been there for 6 months continuously, technically you don't need to provide. But if an officer asks you, you could have to provide. So the other thing is, sometimes it's just the path of least resistance and you can sleep a little bit better at night to apply for that FBI report. If you do the digital fingerprinting online, those FBI digital fingerprinting reports are normally very quick. They'll normally come back to you within a month at tops. So it might just be easier to apply for that US police certificate, include it with the application, and then you don't need to worry about it.
All right, let's tackle a few others. Actually, we'll give a few shout outs. Promise is here. Hi, Promise. How are you doing? Good to have you connecting in. We also have Asima over in Waterloo connecting in on LinkedIn. Looks like we've got a few people in different platforms that are connecting in today. Okay,
And
let's hit, oh, sorry, yeah.
I was just going to say, Mark, Promise is saying IRCC portal and landing and web forms, and she
Oh,
can't get the login information, and she's frustrated. So
yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that, Promise. I see a few other people are also posting the same thing. It's been over 50 days. They're still waiting for those landing emails. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough right now.
Yeah, these are things that Alicia and I are completely outside of our realm of experience. For 20 years we've been doing this, and never have we seen things so bad. And once again, I can't help it, Alicia. I can't help but pull it up. But we've got our fine minister here, and I know that him and his predecessor are working with millions and millions of taxpayer dollars to modernize the immigration system. And I'll be honest, I've only seen it gotten worse and worse. The only thing that we have seen that has changed is that we don't find the portal crashing as frequently when we're, the GCMS key. So there's a positive. We don't see the portal crashing as frequently as it used to be, but there are still periods of time when I shouldn't even say that. There still are experiences like that. But the landing process is something that I'm not quite sure about. Why there would be this delay, like what would cause it? And the government is not very transparent. They're very, very good at just not saying anything about the problems until the Canadian Bar Association or CELA or the representative associations hound them and hound them and hound them to give us some information. They're very tight-lipped about it. And I don't know, Alicia, if it's just mismanagement, if they need to just clean house and get some people in who actually want to run the programs properly, or if it's not their fault and it's just the cards that they're dealt, which is often the case too. Good people who enter into the immigration department trying to do their best, but they're working with technology that should have been revamped years ago and really care. So I'm sure it's a
Yeah.
mix of both, right?
And I have heard too, Mark, that officers are under intense pressure, right? Like they're trying to do as a person over 100 applications per day, right? And so it's just they're trying. I know, well, uh, I've heard through the grapevine that things were shifted from one department to a different department, and that maybe is accounting for some of those delays. But for sure unique or promise. Make sure that you're following up by web form. Keep copies of those web forms. It sounds like you have done so. For people who have not yet sent a web form, if it's over 50 days and you still don't have that landing email, do send the web form. Make sure you're using the new web form that we showed you. Igor and I pulled it up the other week. It's the one with all the little boxes, right, that says my application. It says application at the top, update an application, tell us about what's happening with your application. Use that one, not the old one, because the old one seems to go into the abyss, and the new one, we've actually been getting some traction in terms of responses on it. So make sure to use that new web form.
Okay, and I'm just going to see if I can pull it up here, Alicia. Let's see if we can find it. Okay, I'll just share this screen with everybody. So this one here is the old one. Okay, guys, so this is the one that traditionally we used for a long, long time. And I'm just trying to find the other one.
It's secure.cic.gc.ca client contact.
Okay, we'll pull it up. So I want to, let's see.
I'll just send you the link, Mark.
Sure, that'd be great. I think maybe I found it already. Is it this one here, Alicia?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the one. Okay, application. So yeah, so use this one here with all the drop-down options versus the old school one. All right. Okay, we're just about out of time. Let's get to a couple more questions. Oh, this one's a sad one. Okay, guys, I really, really respect Solomon for coming on, because most people, when they have problems, they don't talk about it. They just suffer in silence. And so everybody thinks that the whole process is so easy, that there's not any issues, and that if they make a mistake or something goes wrong, then they must be dumb. They must, not be as smart as other people, when it is not the case at all. So Solomon says, "Hey, Mark, Merry Christmas. I sadly received a decision on the permanent residence as incomplete owing to the kid's passport, regardless of the letter of explanation." So I know what's happened here. So they didn't have the passport for the child, so tried to put a letter of explanation in saying, "Hey, we've applied for it. We're going to, we'll submit it as soon as we get it. Can I request reconsideration for change accompanying family to overcome a refusal?" So Alicia, I've got my own thoughts on this, but this is just an example of how cruel they can be. Okay. Because an officer could have very easily done that. And, I hear the stories, Alicia, too, about the workloads of the officers. Then freaking hire some more officers, like hire more people. If the officers are under that heavy of a load, then they need to hire some more. And I've had, Alicia, as the national chair, I had meetings with ministers. I had meetings with Mendocino and with Fraser, and Fraser talked about how actively they were trying to hire people. Well, I can guarantee that there are people out there that would love to work for immigration. And anyways, okay. So what are your thoughts on this one? What should Solomon do? The reconsideration even make sense?
So if you're trying to ask for reconsideration by taking off that family member, there's some risk there, right? They're not going to want to remove a family member. And if you try to remove a family member and that child was not medically examined, I mean, they were declared, but hopefully they have been medically examined also, then that can have negative consequences under Section 117, sub 9, sub D, that would bar you from sponsoring your child in the future. So be really careful about whether your child was included in the application, had medical exams done, declared, you've got birth certificates, you've got proof that that child is yours. But trying to take off that family member because they don't have a passport after the refusal is generally not going to work. You can try to send a reconsideration request to IRCC and say, look, like here was a copy of the letter that I included saying we've done our best to try to get the passport. There's delays from our home country. There might be issues in the home country with respect to passport issuance. We are asking for humanitarian and compassionate consideration. So I would strongly suggest you talk to a lawyer, try to put a reconsideration request together with some assistance. If you have more than one child, you're going to want to emphasize the best interests of all the children, right? That it's important for your family not to be split up and that it's only fair for you to be given more time to get that child's passport. But this is a tough situation because at a certain point, if your application has been on hold for a long time because you couldn't get the passport, at a certain point, having a passport or some other valid travel document is a requirement. And so immigration can't actually land your family unless they do have valid identity documents and international travel documents.
Yes. All right. Well, we're going to wrap this one up, guys. um, okay, I'll pull up Spider-Man. I'm Mark and Alicia saying hi from Van Cleek. Just had my last staff meal at the school. I'm still trying to convince my employer to connect with you guys for a second opinion. Yeah, I hear you, because there's no issues with the strategy that we had going forward. And this is the case sometimes with employers. Sometimes they just don't want to be bothered. So our heart breaks for you, my friend. I know you're in the same situation as many people. Some people are posting comments, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to everyone, especially those of you who are expressing frustrations, who are now seeing that your chance of staying in Canada after years, right? Maybe you were involved in the first or the second post-grad extension, and now finally, the writing's on the wall and there isn't going to be a pathway for you. Like, our hearts break for you guys. And I really feel like there was a massive disservice done by the schools and by anyone who convinced you to come and guarantee that there was a pathway to permanent residence. Because I'll be honest, although immigration never said that there was a guarantee, everything, all the actions, all of the programs, even the 18-month extensions, I'll be honest, for many of you, I wish that they never did the 18-month post-grad policies. I wish they never would have, because all it did was delay you guys working in crappy jobs for employers. And I shouldn't, I think it's because I'm
So Mark,
sick. Yeah.
I'll be the good cop. I'll be
Alicia's going to be
the
the good cop
Christmas
because
elf.
I'm a little frustrated.
So the good news after all of this is that hopefully, people who are here as international students were able to complete their Canadian education. They're going to get those points for Canadian education. Hopefully, they were also able to get the postgrad work permit and work for a high skilled occupation, right? Make sure that you have that tier 0, 1, 2, or 3 type of occupation. If you were able to gather that, and if you were able to gather that over those 18-month public policy extensions, then maybe you've been able to cobble together, at least 1 year of high skilled Canadian work experience, or 2 years maybe. And that's going to give you a strong start, even if you do have to go back home and start getting some foreign work experience. So you will still have a leg up compared to other applicants who don't have the Canadian education and don't have the Canadian work experience. So there is a bit of a silver lining, but persevere. If you have to go back to your home country, start getting that foreign work experience, start learning French.
Yeah. And I will also point out, however compelling it is, don't stay if you run out of status. Go home. Show that you're in compliance, because you never know. You could get a job offer from a Canadian company, an LMIA-based job offer, a genuine one, where they're looking at, let's say the tech industry picks up again and they're looking to hire a bunch of new people. And if you have overstayed, and it will absolutely kill, you'll have no future in Canada. So whatever you do, if you do run into the end of your time, then leave and return and show that you're fully compliant. And then the door will be open for you to come back in the future. Looks like we have one super chat that I'll hit on, Alicia. I'm not sure if we can fully answer this, but Hassan says, Mark and Alicia from Beirut, my wife is the main applicant. She is enlisted under my national security number since the benefits are much better, so I pay all the taxes dues. Will that be an issue? So I think what he's saying is that she has work history, but the taxes that are paid are actually attributed to him, so she doesn't have a record of paying taxes on her employment income. I think this is what Hassan is asking.
Mm-hmm. And so, Hassan, for any foreign work experience claimed, you've got to prove, or your wife would have to prove, if she's the principal applicant, that she worked in that occupation. And this is where Mark's course on the Do-It-Yourself Express Entry Guide is really helpful, because sometimes you just can't get exactly the standard cookie cutter way of writing those letters or having your employers write those letters. So it depends on what kind of employers she had, whether she was a full employee or whether she might have been self-employed or she was doing contract work for different clients. There's different ways to put together the letters of explanation and to try to get some more supporting evidence that she was doing the lead statements, the main duties, plus had the hours, plus had the pay to qualify as a high-skilled job. So there's a few different strategies to try to pull together that information, be honest about it, say, look, this is what happened. This is how much my wife was paid because of the tax system here. This is the way that we structured it. Show it to the officer, make sure that you show that these funds came in on this date, it went to this account, but that was employment income for her.
All right. Well, thank you once again, everyone, for posting questions. Your good questions are the reason that we're able to, have this Q&A. And this is something we've been doing for a very, very long time. And I think the first ones are probably about 2016. I think I started doing, I used to call them the EE Live Q&As for those who are around that long. Maybe some people, I don't know if anyone watching now, every once in a while I get people who have followed from the very early days who pop in just to say hello. And, people say, well, why do you charge for your consults? Well, it's because we spend so much time giving free information out to the world. I don't know too many other firms that have a weekly live Q&A like this. Even our blog posts on our website, and this is something that definitely goes underutilized. I think people are not quite aware of it, but on our firm, our blog is chock full of updated content and topics and lots of information on the latest changes, the latest announcements from the minister. So absolutely check that out. You'll also see that we have the Canadian, if I can pull it up here, the Canadian Immigration Podcast, which Alicia and I are working through a business section right now that covers all aspects of the foreign worker program. And you can go back to episode 100. Wow, it's hard to believe it was that far back, but I guess it is, where we went through every aspect of the foreign worker program from how it all works to, the compliance, advertising, all these different aspects of the LMIA process for employers. And then now we're moving through the International Mobility Program and the different international treaties and things that we have going on, intercompany transfers. So it's a lot of business immigration stuff on the podcast. But remember, all of this is, if you haven't, go subscribe. And I don't know if I have, actually, I'm just going to pull up just quick here so that you guys can see one of our, I just recently did a webinar with Journey, and let's see if this pulls up. There it is. So Journey Business Plans, they're the sponsor of our podcast, a great company that helps people who are, in need of a business plan for immigration purposes. And I want to give them a shout out. They've been a really good support to our firm, and they really generate really good products, and it's not brutally expensive. And so they're a really good resource. They do both ways, Canada and US, and they're also involved in, startups or even M&A work. So there's a bunch of different options available, whether you're an individual or whether you're a consultant or lawyer. And if you listen to the podcast, I think there's a little discount code too that is associated with it. So I just want to give them a shout out at the end of our live stream today. All right. Well, I'm going to, as Alicia can attest, I'm a little cranky today, but I do have lots of optimism for immigration in Canada. I feel for all of you who are just, now you're finally at a stage where you're going to have to realize that you're going to need to go home if you don't rank high enough. And you need to continue to keep all your options open. And I saw one person said, I'm going to go apply to New Zealand. All right. Well, good luck, you guys, because at the end of the day, notwithstanding the craziness in Canada, you look at what Australia has recently announced, that they're going to, I think, reduce international students by half, I think. And Canada patterned its immigration programs after New Zealand and Australia. So, and I've got a lot of clients from New Zealand who are looking to immigrate to Canada. So it's just not a really good time in the world right now for it's so competitive because people are all looking to move. But that doesn't mean it's always going to be like that. So if you do have to leave, please comply and show that you're fully compliant. And then you'll have the ability to continue pursuing other options in other countries. Because remember, Canada has information sharing agreements. And if you've overstayed in Canada, it can affect your ability to go to Australia or UK or US or New Zealand, amongst other countries. So I'll just end with that. But next week, it'll be the 20th, I guess. So we'll have a special little Christmas live Q&A next week. And but I want to wish everybody happy holidays and all the best. And thanks, Alicia. Alicia puts up with me. All right.